Hey guys, Harry BHF here. In this video, we're going to be counting down the top 5 worst movies of all time. Now, I've seen lots of films in my life, like hundreds, and out of all of those films that I can remember, these are the 5 worst. So these films are basically, the bottom of the barrel of cinema, really, in my opinion. Um, Obviously, this list is just my opinion. Although I'm sure at least 3 of these films are generally regarded as pieces of crap. um, so yeah, that's all I have to say really. Let's begin the list. Number 5. It's kind of a funny story. The reason this film is lower on the list is just because I don't think that the plot on paper is too bad compared to the other films on this list. But, and this is a big but, the execution is so badly misguided in this film. Like, a lot of the scenes just have no real meaning to them, and the characters have no character. They're just people who I don't really care for at all. And not only that, but this film is so unbearably boring. Like, oh my god, I nearly fell asleep twice the first time I watched this film. And once, for me, is bad enough, but twice is just unforgivable. And there's nothing in this film that draws me to it at all. Like, there's nothing in it that makes me want to go, oh, I'm going to keep watching this scene, or I'm going to keep watching that bit. Just none of that here at all. So, yeah, incredibly boring and a terribly misguided plot. So, for those 2 reasons, this film ranks as number 5 on this list. Now we must move on, because we have 4 more terrible films to talk about. Number 4. Never Say Never Again. Those of you that don't know, this film is an unofficial James Bond film, and it's a remake of Thunderball, which is already a film I'm not a huge fan of because it's quite boring. But this film is even worse than Thunderball, despite being very similar. I'm a James Bond fan, so for a film that is this bad, that's linked to the character, it's very disappointing on basically every level for me. Um, like, the characters are just absolute idiots in this film. The villain, who I don't even remember his name, is very forgettable. He's just like, oh, look at me, I'm going to cause world domination. I just shut up. I do not care. Um, that's the thought process I had when I watched this film, which was probably about 3 months ago now when I saw it. I just do not care about anything that goes on in this film. And Sean Connery, he was brought back to play Bond in this film as a kind of FU to the producers of the actual Bond films because they didn't get on very well. But he is like in his mid 50s by this point. He looks way too old to be Bond. And this was before, Roger Moore in A View to a Kill and stuff. Like, here, he looks like an elderly man or something. He does look too out of shape here. And also, he doesn't really he's not as charming as he was in some of the earlier Bond films, like Doctor No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger. Those films, the charm is just worn off here completely, and this film is incredibly boring. Just like it's kind of a funny story, which I mentioned earlier. So yeah, all those reasons brings this film to number 4, the 4th worst film of all time in my opinion. So let's carry on. Number 3. You Don't Mess with the Zohan. So, unlike the other films I mentioned earlier, I don't find this one to be boring. It's just the main issue here is this film makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Um, for those of you that don't know, this film is about an Israeli man who he works in the military and now he wants to become a hairdresser in New York City, but a group of terrorists have to stop him from doing so, and he has to try and outrun them. I just do not understand it at all. I think this film is supposed to be a comedy, but it's just not funny at all. When I watched this film, I was just confused, trying to understand what the hell I was watching, and it distracted me from it. So it was kind of like a film that stopped me from focusing on it, and instead trying to figure out why I was watching it, and that's not a good experience at all. I don't think. Um, so yeah, as a result, I just don't find it very entertaining. It just makes absolutely no sense. It's ridiculous. Not boring, but still absolutely abysmal. So for those reasons, this film is number 3 on the list.
Number 2, After Earth.
M. Night Shyamalan films nowadays have a reputation of typically being quite bad, if we're honest, and After Earth is no exception. The issue with this film is it's just so generic. Like, there's really nothing to it, almost to the point where it's pretty much unwatchable. Like, the plot basically is Will Smith and Jaden Smith. It's like a father and son thing we have going on here. They crash land their spaceship on Earth, which has been abandoned for 1,000 years, and they have to make their way back to where they came from. That's literally it. It's just so bland. Like, and also I think the acting is pretty bad. Like Will Smith, who is an actor which I actually quite like. Here he's just not as good in his other performances, like Men in Black, for example. He kind of just sits in a chair and says things. Like, there's really nothing to his performance, and I don't think that's necessarily his fault, but they could have made him do more, I think. And Jaden, he just moans and whinges the whole time. Like, there's this one scene where he's like, "I'm not a coward. You're the coward." It's basically like an hour and 3/4 of him just whinging the whole time. Um, which it just annoys me to death. I just hate this film because of that, and also because of how generic it is. It comes across as extremely boring. Um, as a viewing experience, it just has nothing to it at all. It's very nearly unwatchable. The only thing that saves this film from being the very worst film of all time for me is that it just so happens that our number 1 film, I recently came to the conclusion that that was the very worst film I'd ever seen in my life. So, yeah, let's get onto that film and find out what it is.
And now, number 1, my very least favourite film of all time.
I've only seen this film twice. The first time I saw it, I really didn't like it, but I watched it again recently, and now I've decided it's my very least favourite film of all time. And that film is.
The Last Witch Hunter.
I'm only going to briefly cover this film because if I were to fully explain why this film is my very least favourite of all time, this video would be an hour long. So I'm just going to briefly cover this. Basically, it makes no sense, it's unforgivably boring, and the plot is just not interesting at all, and it doesn't work. Basically, Vin Diesel plays this guy who's been alive for 800 years, uh, and he has to hunt the witches that possess people. How on earth is a film going to work with a plot that is that generic? Like, like this film is just proof that you need to make a plot interesting before actually adapting it into a film. Like, and they clearly haven't done that here. Um, yeah, I've basically decided never to go back to this film ever again. It's not worth my time, and it's probably not worth your time either. So I definitely wouldn't recommend this film. Um, yeah, that's basically all I have to say about it. So yeah, that's the list. So that was my top 5 worst movies of all time. Feel free to put your top 5 worst in the comment section below if you want to. And other than that, yeah. See you guys later. Bye for now.